Well, that theme song keeps evolving and changing for Book Lunch. This is Mitch Hampton, host of Journey of an Aesthete podcast. And this Book Lunch is a long-running mini-series on the Rabbit novels of the late, great John Updike. And hope the sound is clear. Always check in with our producer, Laurie Strickland. Really phenomenal work that she does on this show. And it's important, you know, that would be a whole episode in itself discussing that, how we create a show, how we work together. But she's in the chat, and so and Chester helps out too. That's another. there's a lot of hands that go into making Journey of an Aesthete podcast. And in any event, this is episode 3 of the Rabbit novels, and there's a lot to cover today. And to be quite honest with you, I was undecided on how to proceed, because well, first of all, there's many novels, and I'm reading them from my admittedly peculiar point of view, being 57 and having grown up with this author John Updike and these books, and also considering that I reread them in different times of my life. And so for this series, I actually reread all 4 of these novels. There's a 4th because there's a novella that came out in the 2000s, 04, roughly at the end of Updike's life, which is about the kids or the offspring of the main characters of all these novels. Nelson and Harry Angstrom, our main character, had some children. Had a child, I believe, with Ruth, who was the part-time sex worker, part-time housewife from our novel from the 50s, Rabbit Run and Rabbit Redux. And so there's a lot of characters here, but again, I want to. This is off the top of my head. This is a saga, sociological saga of America. I would say between the 50s and into the 2000s. That's a long stretch of time, but that happens to be the era. There happens to be a self-enclosed era of, so let's talk off the top of my head for a little bit, if I may, a little bit about qualities of that era. So I call it the analog era. It's an era of, looked at now, only with hindsight can we say this now. It was what I call the liberal democratic era, by which I mean an economic and political system that was a blend of conservative ideas and liberal ideas, that was about rule of law and separation of powers. And during that long period, there were many mistakes. There were many things that were wrong, but on the whole, it was a force for good, and it was taken for granted in those 40 years, and a lot of it was caused by, I think, World War II, and so the revelations of the Holocaust, or Shoah, as I prefer to call it, and fascism, and then later on Stalinism and the holdover of Stalinism in the 70s, 60s and 70s. Khrushchev, Soviet world, what we call the totalitarian states. That period, a little bit too late. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Peter's right about that. Well, I don't want to talk too much about geopolitics, only to say that that was a I call that the analog era. And so, all of the stuff we're going to be looking at today is an attempt by John. Now, John Updike is a very serious author. He's pretty highbrow, but he's also very commercially successful and relatable. And that's an interesting thing to think about, because there's this sometimes these widening gulf or gap between what we would call avant-garde or art for the very small cognoscenti. For example, John Jost, our very first episode, avant-garde filmmaker John Jost he's a very creative, interesting, exciting filmmaker, but also very unusual, uncompromising his ideas about film. So if we go from John Jost to Steven Spielberg, there's these diversity. And so in a sense, I guess John Updike fits somewhere in the middle of there, maybe a little bit on the more So he's trying to blend these elements. But the only reason why I'm going on and on about geopolitics is because in these very novels, John Updike is trying to give you both what I call the sociological details of the era that he is covering, the hit parade or the top 40 songs, the fashions, mores of sex and mating, assumptions, bigotries, prejudices, popular songs, popular network TV shows, sociological detail, the kind of stuff that Tom Wolfe and Gay Talese were so interested in those years. But Updike's genius is he weds that kind of what I call outside or external, what's on the radio, what somebody's wearing, the length of skirts, the bare midriffs and halter tops and bell-bottom slacks and three-piece suits and Walter Cronkite and Ted Koppel, kind of external things that you can go down the street and just see from an external point of view and kind of a more we call superficial point of view. He weds all of that information. He studies all that information, almost like a cultural historian, actually, in a way. Were John Updike here, he would disagree with that assessment because he knows actual cultural historians who do the job professionally. I'm not on their, the Christopher Lashes of the world. As you recall, Christopher Lash, who wrote Jimmy Carter's famous speech. No, I'm sorry, he did not. Scratch that. James Fallows, the Atlantic Monthly editor, was the speechwriter of that famous Jimmy Carter speech in '79. But it was influenced by Lash. But Christopher Lash and John Updike were roommates at Harvard. All of that stuff is, the stuff we've been talking about. But he weds that to an interest in Henry James, Marcel Proust, James Joyce. An interest in the very abstract, almost metaphysical. In Updike's case, not almost. Updike is a Christian author. He's not a secular author. So there's that spiritual influence. What I would call sort of extremely internal, unique, impressionistic documentation of consciousness, what it feels to be human, what things feel like inside. And Updike is always mindful. I got to get both of this stuff in here. I got to get that Harry Engstrom is listening to Hot Stuff by Donna Summer on the radio, because that's what's playing on the radio, and that John Updike is trying to, Harry Engstrom, our main character, is trying to decide if he's sexually aroused by Bo Derek's corn rolls from the movie 10, or if he doesn't like it. These are sort of these kinds of things, He's trying to decide these things, but there's this kind of attempt. And so one of the other ways I discuss this in my close reading model is I see it as a suspension of narrative. A suspension of story. So these novels have stories, and the stories are sometimes rather suspenseful. You recall in Rabbit Run, his wife Janice accidentally murders in a drunken state, being drunk, murders their newborn baby, accidentally, drowns the baby. Very dramatic. Book 2, Rabbit Redux, takes about the 60s, late 60s. Rabbit forms a commune with Skeeter, the African-American revolutionary, and sort of a teen female runaway. Dramatic. But there's also an interest in suspending or putting a halt to the action and going inside the state of mind in a moment. In a Bergsonian, if I could put it that way, Henri Bergson, there's a new biography of Bergson coming out just now. Bergsonian like a durational performance artwork. 70s, Carolee Schneemann, maybe Karen Finley a little later on. Durational artwork at the same time. Because there's a kind of a tension. These are kind of different different goals for an artist. If an artist wants to capture an era, if it's important to an artist to capture an era, then that's going to crowd out other considerations. That's not good or bad. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just saying it's a preference or an emphasis. Like, so I don't know what comes to mind. The movie Dazed and Confused, which is actually one of the greatest films ever made, I think. It's still my favorite Linklater film, more than Slacker. Don't sue me, but don't kill me, but I like it even better than Slacker. That's a movie about a high school in 1976, like one day in a high school. And that movie is so interested in getting the facts right about this Texas town. The clothes the kids would wear, you know. But there are moments of lyricism in Dazed and Confused. So, for example, Randall Pink Floyd, when there's a monologue at the end of the film where he's saying, I'm stuck in this place, and Matt McConaughey, you know, he's throwing a frisbee or football, and it kind of, the camera goes up into the sky, and how are we going to look at ourselves now when we look back when I was stuck in this place and I got laid when I was stuck in this place? Almost like a prose poem. And not Parker Posey, Lynn Adams, a famous character actress of this era, Joey Lauren Adams, who did a lot of stuff with Kevin Smith, make giggles, you know, and so it's a kind of a, so even make like letter in a very sociological film, Dazed and Confused, even he, like Updike, has to be lyrical and has to suspend action and goals for the holdovers is amazing. Yeah, Peter, you know, it's interesting. Wow, I'm in an interactive dialogue with Peter here. That was my favorite film of that year. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. But you're right. So the period, but I kind of thought it would be a really good idea. We're going to get to some television stuff too a little bit later. I have queued up a Dick Cavett show with John Cheever and John Updike, a famous show. And for a period of time, the New Yorker on their website had this show, and then it was taken down there, and now it's been up on YouTube for some time. I added it to my John Updike playlist, and we're going to talk about John Cheever because in the show, John Cheever says what I like about John Updike, and John Updike says what the two Johns, the two white males, you know, John Updike says what I like about Cheever. I'm going to talk about Cheever a little bit. They were often confused at that time. I thought it'd be great to, in Rabbit is Rich, which is where we are now more or less. We're doing this in kind of a linear fashion. The third book, which is all about the 70s. The book comes out in 1982, I think, or 81. And so it deals with the 70s as much as Rabbit Redux deals with the political conflicts of the late 60s. You know, if you recall, that commune is burned down. So when we last left off of Rabbit Redux, the commune's burned down by racist neighbors who don't like that Skeeter is living with these white characters. And even worse with a female character, and kind of burned down their apartment. 10 years goes by. We're in 1980, 79, yeah. Rabbit is Rich. And the very first line is running out of gas. We're in the energy crisis of the late 70s. Jimmy Carter, thankfully, is president. At that time, no one thought thankfully, just a few, but in hindsight, we might see him a little bit more positively than he was seen at the time. But there's problems in the Iranian hostages, and the gas prices are high, and gas lines, and so running out of gas. So I don't know what I want to do first. I want to show you a little piece of pop artifact here. You know, in our show, we like to talk about volume and mass and things that take up space. And some of those things are magazines, not just books, but magazines. And I am fortunate to have the Playboy magazine from September 1981 with the upcoming hit novel Rabbit is Rich by John Updike anthologized in its pages. And this is the magazine. There's a Bo Derek poster, which actually I still have in here. And if it's interesting to look at the cover here, it says the Gimme Decade. The me decade's over. You know, pop, you know, not celebrity, but kind of a commercial or pop commentators like to make up, you know, as Tom Wolfe coined the term me decade, make up labels. Catchy sing-song labels to describe, you know, an era. I guess I should say the Copyright Act. Copyright Act of 1976, the bicentennial year. This video will include copyrighted material. The material is used for the purposes of commentary, which is what we're doing, and criticism, and it falls under the fair use doctrine of copyright law. Very important. And so I wanted to look inside here, not in its pictorials, but to see, you know, you have a novel coming out, you're John Updike, and you're, I should say that Playboy magazine, so the more, I guess, racy, if that was the term, more adult type of magazines like Esquire for men, Playboy magazine would have, you know, tough fiction by Robert Stone or Kurt Vonnegut Jr. And John Updike. But then you also had, you know, magazines that had more of a female audience in the 60s, like Look. My girlfriend reminds me last month that she subscribed to Look magazine in this small town in Michigan and would see articles on what was going on at Andy Warhol's factory in Look magazine or Glamour. Different era. And would have, you know, fiction by Iris Murdoch or Doris Lessing, you know, or I don't know, I'm picking names out of a hat. Maybe John Updike, I don't know. John Updike was more New Yorker, primarily a New Yorker. So you had Look magazine, Vogue would have fiction sometimes. But I guess the more famous of those years was Saturday Evening Post for, you know, anthologized fiction. And I'm doing all this off the top of my head, so I'm sure I'll forget something. But my half encyclopedic knowledge here. Yeah, Look. Let's see, Saturday Evening Post. I don't have any Saturday Evening Posts here, but New Yorker. So let's look inside here and see how things look. Here we go. So, here we go. Rabbit is Rich. First look. Who would have thought sweet Cindy could be such a dirty little thing? I hit the ball okay, Rabbit, Engstrom says, but damn, it could, what does he say? It could, damn it, I could score. It is the weekend of gas drought, June 1979. So already, and there's this provocative photo painting here. Very much Playboy magazine sensibility and style. And the era we're in now is marked by the sexual revolution and a frankness and I think devil-may-care attitude towards sex, which no longer really exists, I don't think. And that's in this novel too, but all that is in here. So, and that's certainly in this magazine. They're going to excerpt, you know. So, that's not the only thing in here. All this connects, don't worry. It's interesting just to look at things like this. 1981 says Carlson cigarette ads. Carlson cigarettes is telling you we have the lowest tar. Another cigarette ad, Benson and Hedges of the era. This says 1981 on the cover, but we are still in the 70s. The 70s has not left us. I don't really think you get until you get to 83 or 84 when you start really, just because Reagan is elected and there's some different colors in the air, some teal and fuchsia and magenta as opposed to chocolate brown, and doesn't mean that the 80s has fully arrived yet. So there's that. But there's something else I found really interesting. I've got to look at table of contents. You can see here in the playbill they have, again, a liquor ad, Chivas Regal. This is the kind of thing you would see. There's John Updike there in the, yeah, there. Authors of the time had more hair, beards, you know, styles were different. They would pose smoking a cigarette like that dude is there. And imagine taking an author photograph today. No one would be posed with a cigarette like that. Okay. Here's an advertisement for this new way to listen to music. Panasonic stereo to go, more ways than anyone to fill the room, meaning the room of your record player inside your head. I guess an early Walkman, I guess. I mean, it's important to spend time on this stuff because I'm trying to, in a way, give you the vibe and the feeling of what these characters in this novel are living in and with, you know, what they're experiencing. Because it's this, you know, stuff. I'm going to get out my glasses. All right. One glass is good. Yeah, there we go. Okay. There's an article in here on how Jerry Rubin has found money. So Jerry Rubin's transformation from do it and revolutionary to fan of Werner Erhard and Est, and I think he's wearing a three-piece suit. I can't show you everything, you know, it's just interesting. An interview with a best-selling author, James Michener, he talks about Hawaii and Centennial. And in this interview, James Michener says, I am a proud liberal. One of the interesting things about this era is that most of the creators and artists are, I guess, what today we would call progressive. But they sort of take it for granted. They just assume that all, you know, logical thinking people will have that persuasion. It's just assumed. And sort of, it's just very different. So that, you know, James Michener was somebody everybody read, and I'm sure he might have voted for McGovern. I don't know. He certainly would have voted for Mondale, Walter Mondale. I don't know. I don't want to get too off topic, but so let's see here. 116. Look what we have here. Wait for it. Yeah, that's a reference to the blowjob tutorial in the movie. But this is Cameron Crowe's original Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Again, in the fall of 1979, the author, and this is how before it was a movie, being the true story of a year in high school reported by a writer in student disguise, Raw. And just as I mentioned Dazed and Confused, this is more or less. So this magazine has John Updike and Cameron Crowe in it, and I don't know. Jerry Rubin. Interesting. In any event, we've covered that. Give you a sense of the times. I'm going to take a drink of coffee here. There's a couple of really bravura passages in this novel, The Rabbit is Richmond, that are just so phenomenal and so dense. So I have one. I'm just going to read it. It's going to be a lot of reading for my part, so my throat's ready, I hope. My vocal cords. It's quite incredible. I just want to get a sense. I'm going to two passages of how far Updike, the author, goes in showing the interiority of this man. Okay, here we go. The day is still golden outside, old gold now in Harry's lengthening life. He has seen summer come and go until its fading is one in his heart with its coming, though he cannot yet name the weeds that flower each in its turn through the season, or the insects that also in ordained sequence appear, eat, and perish. He knows that in June school ends, and the playground's open, and the grass needs cutting again and again if one is a man. And if one is a child, games can be played outdoors while the supper dishes tinkle in the mellow parental kitchens, and the moon is discovered looking over your shoulder out of the sky, still blue, and a silver blob of milkweed spittle has appeared mysteriously on your knee. Good luck. Car sales peak in June. For a 300 car a year dealer like Harry, this means upwards of 25 units, with 21 accounted for already and 6 selling days to go. Average 800 gross profit times 25 equals 20 grand minus the 25% they estimate for salesman's compensation. Both salary and incentives leaves 15 grand minus between 8 and 10 for other salaries. Those cute little cunts come and go in billing. The one called Sissy Pollock a few years ago. They go back as they rubbing fannies, easing by in the corridor, and the rent that Sprainer Motors pays itself. Old man Sprainer. I hate to interrupt this wonderful. Sprainer, of course, is his wife Janice's dad, who's what makes everybody rich with selling Toyotas. Again, context there. Old man Sprainer didn't believe in owning anything the banks could own. But even he had to pay off the mortgage eventually. Boy, the rates now must kill anybody starting up. And the financing, double-digit interest, Brewer Trust, been doing it for years. And against the 12%, you got to figure the 2 or 3% that comes back at loss reserves. Nobody like to call it kickback. And the IRS calls it taxable earnings. And the upkeep, the electricity, that Sun 2001 diagnostic computer manning wants a lot of juice, and the power tools, they can't even turn it on a wheel anymore. It has to be pneumatic, and the heat. Thank God a few months reprieve from those fucking Arabs are killing us, and the men won't wear sweaters under the coveralls, the young mechanics, or the worst, they say, they lose feeling in their fingertips and health insurance. There's another killer up, and the hospitals keep people alive that are really dead. Like some game they're playing at Medicaid's expense. And the advertising, he often wonders how much good it does. A rule of thumb he read somewhere is 1.5% of gross sales. But if you look at the auto sales page of the Sunday paper, you never saw such a jumble, just the quiet listing of the prices and the shadow of the dealer, like old man Springer, said the man he gets known to be at Rotary and in the downtown restaurants and the country club. Really, he should be allowed to take all that off business expenses. $4.75 a week he pays himself. Doesn't take into account the suits to make himself presentable. He has to buy 3 or 4 a year at Kroll's anymore. He doesn't like that salesman who measured his fat waist. Webb Merkett knows of a little shop on Pine Street, and that's as good as hand tailoring. And then the property taxes, and the kids keep throwing stones or shooting BBs at the glass signs. Outside, we ought to go back to grouted wood. But National Toyota has its specifications. Where was he? Let's see. 9 total monthly expenses, variable, invariably. That leaves 4 net profit, and deduct another 1,000 from that for inflation and pilferage and the unpredictable that's always there. You still have 3. 1,500. 1,500 for Ma Sprainer and 1,500 for Janice and him, plus the 2,000 salary when his poor dead dad used to go off to the print shop at 7:15 every morning for $40 a week. And that wasn't considered bad money then. Harry wonders what his father would think if he could only see him now rich. Now that's kind of Updike's thing. That's why that's why we revere him today, is because of things like that. And again, in this mode, you take the point of view totally of the character. There's no authorial, omniscient correction of his racism or his, economic. Well, he might be bright. I can't comment on, he could probably understand some things about the economy, but he's probably also clueless at the same time. And conspiracy theories and sort of all the things. It's all in there because you're dealing with this person, Harry Angstrom. And there's more. There's other passages. So we're going to deal with some passages like that. We're also going to deal with conversations. If you recall in Rabbit Redux, there were political, controversial conversations about Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Booker T. Washington and racism, because Harry Angstrom, the conservative, as you remember that novel, he's conservative because he voted for Hubert Humphrey. Because in the world of 1968, liberals didn't vote for Hubert Humphrey. No, conservatives. And Hubert Humphrey is a big government guy that wants to have, a welfare state. But why is he conservative? Because he's pro-Vietnam War, right? I guess. So, times change and perceptions are different. Call Hubert Humphrey. Main character calling, I'm a conservative. I'm okay, he says to the cops. I voted for Hubert Humphrey. I'm not one of those people that voted for, some commie. I don't know who the I didn't vote, don't blame me. I didn't vote for Bobby. I guess Bobby Kennedy. I'm okay. That kind of thing. So, the way that here we go. Here's some. This is just so much fun. The disco music he's listening to the radio. All throughout this whole novel, practically all it talks about, aside from women's body parts, because it's narrated by this character who's a certain kind of straight male, and who's hot or not. It's the music of the era. So this example of. All right. The disco music shifts to the Bee Gees. These are white men who have done this wonderful thing and making themselves sound like black women. Staying Alive comes on with all that amplified trebleo, and a strange nasal whining underneath. The John Travolta theme song. Rabbit still thinks of him as one of the Sweat Hawks of Mr. Carter's class, but for a while back there last summer, the USA was 100% his. Every twat under 15 wanting to be humped by a former Sweat Hawk in the backseat of a car parked in Brooklyn. He thinks of his own daughter getting into the backseat of the Corolla, bare leg up to her ass. He doesn't have a daughter, so it's a strange, it's kind of, this is, he goes on and on. I won't go that. In the movies of the period, he talks about Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal in the main event, the boxing picture. But there's a let's see here. Where are we here? Okay, sure. Here we go. No, that's not it. Yeah, here's the thing. This is him talking about his past, being a basketball star, remembering, It says, for a while, Harry had kicked against death. Then he gave in and went to work. Now the dead are so many, he feels for the living around him the camaraderie of survivors. He loves these people with him, pinned in among the lines of the tennis court. Ed and Loretta. He's an electrical contractor from Easton specializing in computer installations. Harry loves the treetops above their heads and the August blue above these. What does he know? He never reads a book, just the newspaper to have something to say to people. And then mostly human interest stories, like where the Shah is headed next, and how sick is really the Shah, and that Baltimore doctor. He loves nature. John Updike capitalizes nature here in that passage. See? Loves nature. That's a nod to the metaphysical idealist. You would capitalize nature or truth or beauty. And it's interesting because that's not Harry Angstrom. That's Updike. A little bit of a free indirect style, maybe. I don't know. That's another. He loves nature, though he can name almost nothing in it. Loves it, but doesn't know anything about it. Don't know much about history or biology, etc. Right? Doesn't know anything in it. Are these pines or spruces or firs? beats me, he says. He loves money, though he doesn't understand how it flows to him or how it leaks away. He loves men, uncomplaining with their pot bellies and cross-hatched rednecks, embarrassed for what to talk about when the game is over, whatever the game is. What a threadbare thing we make of this life. Yet what a marvelous thing the mind is. They can't make a machine like it, though some of these computers Ed was telling about fill the rooms, and the body can do 1,000 things. There isn't a factory in the world can duplicate that motion. He used to love screwing, though more and more he's willing just to think about it and let the younger people mess with it. So that's funny. I love sex, I like women, but I'm tired. I don't want to do it anymore. Let those young people take care of it. This is the monologue of a man who's 40. You know, he's not 70 or 80, or he's not. Just funny. I mean, it's just funny. Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. But there's an honesty, just the honesty of the prose. You know, I guess today we would say frankness or brutal honesty. And again, more pop culture. In this era, everybody watched the same things. They watched Walter Cronkite, true. They watched Harry Reasoner and Mike Wallace, 60 Minutes. And they watched SNL, first, second season, Saturday Night Live. And they watched Charlie's Angels. So here's Updike weaves in how characters interpret what they're watching, what they're reading. On television, the Charlie's Angels are chasing the heroin smugglers in a great array of expensive automobiles that slide and screech, that plunge through fruit carts and large panes of glass, and finally collide one with another, and then another, tucking into opposing fenders and grills in a great slow-motion climax of bent metal and arrested motion and final justice. This angel who has replaced Farrah Fawcett Majors gets out of her crumpled Malibu and tosses her hair, and there is a freeze frame. Nelson laughs in empathetic triumph of all those totaled Hollywood cars. Then the more urgent tempo and subtly louder volume of the commercial floods the room. A fresh palette of reflected light paints the faces, chubby and clownish, side by side of Melanie and Nelson, as they sit on the old sofa of gray nappy stuff cut into a pattern and gaze at the television set where they have placed in it the rearranged living room where the book-a-lounger used to be. Beer bottles glint on the floor beneath their propped-up feet, hanging drifts of Swedish smoke. Sweetish, not the country, but SWEETISH, sweet, like sweet flavor. Swedish smoke flicker in polychrome, as if the ghosts of Charlie's Angels are rising to the ceiling. Great smash up, Nelson pronounces, with difficulty rising and fumbling the television set. I thought it was stupid, Melanie says in her voice of muffled singing. Melanie's Harry's wife, I think. Oh shit, you think everything is stupid except what's his name? Kerchief. That's G.I. Gurdjieff. She has a prim mode of withdrawal into mental regions where she knows he cannot reach. Yeah, so they're into... You know, it's in this era that Meetings with Remarkable Man by Peter Brook, the film. P.D. Ospenskaya comes out. I saw that with my dad, by the way. One of the many films I saw with my dad. I haven't really seen it since. It's a pretty long one. Yeah, Meetings with Remarkable Man. Mysticism. I don't know. But that's, you know, that's kind of... going back and forth from the Charlie's Angels to the Gurdjieff. So there are events in this novel. They go on a vacation and they attempt to what I guess they would have called swing. So towards the end of the novel, Harry Angstrom. Now everybody wants to sleep with Cindy, the painting from the magazine, who's the girlfriend of a guy named Webb. the younger one of the people, and but alas, it's not to happen. Updike settles for Thelma, who is, I guess, Harrison's wife or girlfriend. Harrison is a disreputable, awful character in this novel. I mean, he's far right wing and irresponsible, and and Updike, he occasionally has really flat out bad characters. But they're not. They're part of the mix. They seem to it's a matter of, and of course he never loses sight of their humanity, which is interesting. That's the thing. Anyhow, they and then I think his wife Janice goes. Who does she go with? I don't. It's complicated. But I wanted to have an example of some political discussion of just the characters. I think this is Rabbit and Nelson, his son. In this novel, Nelson, yeah. I guess he's a late teen, something like that. 19, 20, I don't know. We're talking about basketball. Harry asks him, his son Nelson, Harry asks him, did you stay up to watch the 76ers finish? Nah. That Gervin for San Antonio was something, wasn't he? I heard on the radio this morning he finished with 46 points. Basketball is all goons, if you ask me. Well, it's changed a lot since my day, Rabbit admits. The refs used to call traveling once in a while at least. Now, Christ, they eat up half the floor going in for a layup. I like hockey, Nelson says. I know you do. When you have the damn Flyers on, there's nowhere in the house you could go to get away from the yelling. All those in the crowd go in to see a fight break out and someone's teeth get knocked out. Blood on the ice, and that's the drawing card. This isn't going right. He tries another topic. What do you think about those Ruskies in Afghanistan? They sure gave themselves a Christmas present. It's stupid, Nelson says. I mean, Carter's getting all upset. It's no worse than what we did in Vietnam. It's not even as bad because at least it's right next door and they've had a puppet government there for years. Puppet governments are okay though, huh? Well, everybody has them. All of South America is our puppet governments. I bet that'd be news to the... Now, this gets some colorful language. I'm not going to repeat here on this. At least the Russians, Dad, do it when they're going to do it. We try to do it, and then everything gets all bogged down in politics. We can't do anything anymore, Dad. Well, not with people talking like you, we can't, Harry says to his son. How would you feel if you had to go over and fight in Afghanistan? The boy chuckles, Dad, I'm a married man and way past draft age. So that's kind of the world of this novel. There's a moment in here where Harry Angstrom says he loved Skeeter. He uses the word love. The revolutionary, the sometimes con man, sometimes preacher from the commune. I think he's in jail now. I think there's a notice of him being arrested finally. Harry says he loved him, which is interesting. He says he did love Ben in that other passage. So there's an interesting... Harry Angstrom, limited, bigoted though he is, middle American, Pennsylvanian though he is, contains multitudes, I think we can say. So there's this sex scene at the end in this vacation, and then it's like a lot of Updike, he likes to get into a scene and then interrupted narratively. Like there will be a death that interrupts something, or there'll be a notice that someone's getting married. And that's his way of getting from one scene to another, and also a way of having things happen to characters. So, they have to go home. Something happens, they have to leave. They have to leave this wonderful, bucolic, if that's what it is, tropical vacation. and get back home. Somebody has a baby. You have to go back. Baby. Yeah. His wife says something interesting to him. This is the empathy of a wife in the context of what I would call monogamist, ideologically monogamist culture. Still, even in the world of this book, more so today. She does say to her, to her husband Harry, "It's a shame you had to be with Thelma. You wanted to be with Cindy. I felt so sorry for you having Thelma when you wanted Cindy so much." With that, there was no stopping her crying. She's just seeing where she's sobbing. Here's a detail. Webb, who's Cindy's partner. Webb is resplendent in grape-colored alligator shirt and powder blue plaid golf slacks. It's just describing what somebody's wearing. Golf slacks. Ronnie wears last night's dinner clothes and needs to get inside. So the reason why they have to go home, I'm remembering it now, reading it. Now, so like father, like son. In Rabbit Run, Harry Engstrom runs and flees everything. He flees his lover Ruth. He flees his wife Janice. Updike has one of his events which makes Harry have to go back, and that's the baby dying. In this, his son Nelson runs away from his new marriage, just flees. In the late 70s, in the same way that Harry, his dad, fled in the 50s. So they have to go back because they can't find Nelson. Where is he? And in this novel, Nelson's starting to do coke. He's sort of dissatisfied with his marriage. After all, his wife is more Melanie's more sophisticated than him. He's reading Ospinskaya and Gurdjieff and Hermann Hesse, and Nelson doesn't know what that stuff is, doesn't care about that stuff, and so there's already a conflict of values inside the marriage, and so that's how this novel ends. Rabbit at Rest, and we're going to enter the world of the 80s and early 90s. The next novel. So that's a little peek into Updike's style. And now we're going to peek into him as a television personality, him and Cheever. Let me just get the TV ready and close out with that.
Even to the point.
All right. Okay. This is the show. So when is this show? I'm going to see if I can find the date. I think it's 1981, 80, I don't know. Let's find out. Yeah, no, of course, no. Well, actually, I could actually Rabbit is Rich has just come out, so that's another reason I chose it. So 1980, 81.
Forgive me for bringing this up when sometimes someone will say, I find it hard to keep them straight.
They're confused with each other. Dick Cavett. Sure.
Well, let's certainly introduce her, Paul.
I'm very flattered by the linkage, if insofar as it exists. I've been admiring John long before I became a writer, so the linkage redounds to my benefit considerably. I wish I could write like John Cheever, but I don't feel I do, and I see him do things effortlessly that I couldn't do with a great deal of effort. So the similarities to me aren't as meaningful as the differences.
Is he an influence?
Well, yes, I think so. I think any good writer to some extent influences you, but it was not John's writing that led me to write about suburbia. It was the fact that I lived in a kind of suburb, and I think our attitudes behind these superficial resemblances that are so striking, there's really quite a difference. Attitude toward our material and the angle, the kind of color we bring to it. John is, in a way, I think, more of a transcendentalist than I am. There's a kind of radiance which he feels and conveys that I'm not sure.
So that's very interesting. John Updike I described as partially Christian. So there's a metaphysical dimension to Updike's prose. But Updike says, I'm more the naturalist guy. I'm more down to earth. Cheever is an actual transcendentalist. Goes further than I do. We'll find out in a little bit. But kind of interesting perception.
Would it be interesting or fun for each of you to try to pull off the prank of writing a story under the other's name? Could you parody each other? Or
I don't know whether John has done it or not, but I have occasionally, when John has brought off a paragraph that I think so much greatly superior to anything that I had ever accomplished. And my feeling always is, writing, of course, is not a competitive endeavor, but when I do read a page of John's, it seems to me marvelous. My idea is to put it in a bucket of water and read it upside down. And then occasionally I will try, very much as I suppose a musician will, to see if I can run off a line of that particular kind of line. I think the resemblance between John and me, firstly there is of course a vast difference of age. I'm old enough to be John's father. And I'm an old man nearing the end of my journey, and he's at the peak of his power. And I think the resemblance has also been perhaps exaggerated by the fact that we both are published in the New Yorker. I'm deeply indebted to John for the excellence of his work, and in his last novel, Rabbit is Rich, I think, as I said, I think it's the most exciting novel I've read in a great many years, and John also has consistently given one the impression that writing is an estimable profession. One sometimes loses that in reading reviews of books about sensitive young men who've lost their mothers, going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, that kind of thing.
When you say that, since you don't write criticism, and this is as far as
Okay, that's I'm going to read from a little John Cheever now, and also make a plug, not just for Cheever, The Swimmer, of course. And don't just see the movie, The Fantastic Masterpiece by Frank and Eleanor Perry, with Burt Lancaster and Janice. Is Janice Rule in The Swimmer? I think so. Forget all the from my head. But read the story. And, of course, comparing up. So this is the opening of a short story called Oh, Youth and Beauty. And in Cheever, there's no attempt whatsoever to anchor, to have topical or pop details, as there is throughout all of Updike. So there's that profound difference. In Cheever, you immediately go for the abstract and the impressionistic, as you could tell from this opening, Oh, Youth and Beauty. I should say, Oh, Youth and Beauty is about wealthy suburbanites like John Cheever, and it's about an ex-athletic star, high school athlete who is now middle-aged and has a belly probably and is not in shape anymore, or maybe he is. And every year, he inside this house does the Olympic. What is it? He does the sprint, or does the thing for which he got the awards or was famous. He does it as a like you almost a person would sing at a party. John Cheever's alcoholism is very important to his aesthetics and his art. Not only pejoratively, but also as kind of part of Another plug I want to make is his daughter, Susan Cheever, memoir. Really beautiful book. Is it called Far From Home? Is it something from home? Going Home? I don't remember, but it came out in the 80s. I highly recommend that. And she's a very good writer. In her own right, reporter, Susan Cheever. Anyhow, back to, this is the opening of John Cheever. At the tag end of nearly every long, large Saturday night party in the suburb of Shady Hill, when almost everybody who was going to play golf or tennis in the morning had gone home hours ago, and the 10 or 12 people remaining seemed powerless to bring the evening to an end, although the gin and whiskey were running low, and here and there a woman who was sitting out her husband would have begun to drink milk. When everybody had lost track of time, and the babysitters who were waiting at home for those diehards would have long since stretched out on the sofa and fallen into a deep sleep to dream about cooking contest prizes, ocean voyages, and romance, when the bellicose drunk, the crapshooter, the pianist, and the woman faced with the expiration of her hopes had all expressed themselves, were every proposal to go to the Farquharsons for breakfast, to go swimming, to go and wake up the Townsends, to go here, to go there, died as soon as it was made. Then Trace Bearden would begin to chide Cash Bentley about his age and thinning hair. The chiding was preliminary to moving the living room furniture. Trace and Cash moved the tables and the chairs, the sofas and the fire screen, the wood box and the footstool. And when they had finished, you would not know the place. So they're turning into this living room into a kind of a gymnasium of some kind, and he does this stuff. Now, if you haven't read the story, Cash Bentley's wife, I think Louise, takes a gun and shoots him. In fact, the last line is, that little lever, press that lever, pistol went off and Louise got him in midair. She shot him dead. So you have this long, with all of these independent clauses and addendums and additions, and then it ends with this guy, Cash Bentley, I guess, being shot. So we want to see him do his thing one last time, then we'll shoot him. I think a passage that opens that short story, All Youth and Beauty, in Updike would not only come later or would not open quite that way, but would be prepared, I think, by a little more context. That's one difference. There's also a sense of unreality in Cheever. Even magic, what we call magical realism would be the term. And the swimmer, the main character is, it's not really realistic that he's going to really swim in everybody's house in this neighborhood. And there's a sense in which he's almost like a mythological, magical creature, going from suburban home to suburban home swimming. And Updike doesn't really, that's what they said here, the two admitted. Updike's a little more realistic. And yet Updike is more religious than Cheever. And later on in this show, they both share that they believe, they both agree, but Updike is, interested in Karl Barth and reads Karl Barth. And actually, the theology of Karl Barth, who is also an influence on one of our guests, Brett Whittle. If you go back and look at that episode, our episode with Britt, he discusses Karl Barth. But there's and Kierkegaard, of course. These thinkers influenced Updike's writing, even though Updike is not a theologian and not a philosopher, but a fiction author. So it's 1 p.m. I did think this was going to be a bit longer than an hour, but I feel like maybe we can conclude. And talk about upcoming. There's an author named Erica Verba next month And we're going to discuss one of the great musicians in Chile, Violeta Parra. Violeta Parra. And the folk music scene in Chile of the 50s through, the 50s and the 60s, and politics. And that's very exciting. Love talking to Ms. Verba, Dr. Verba. And that'll be coming up next week. There'll be some musical things coming up, aesthetic episodes, book lunch. Episode 4, we will move into the 80s and 90s. We need the 70s a little bit behind. And continue to talk about this. This, in a way, most American of authors. And at the same time, most, I would dare say, transcendental of authors, John Updike. And I thank you for coming out, and hope to see you soon.